break those numbers down now with Andre Cilliers of TreasuryOne. Andre, thank you for your time this evening. So the JSE has had a very good run this week, closing a little bit flat today. What would you say were some of the biggest movers on the local bourse?
Well, we've seen the banking stocks, the financial side, doing quite well. Some of the banks are up quite significantly. Generally, financial stocks did better. Overall, commodities also did fairly well. Did give up some of the gains year to date, but that's mostly because we've seen the commodity prices being a little bit under pressure today. However, I think that's short term, so maybe a little bit of profit taking. Overall, retail stocks didn't do too bad. I would say generally the whole market throughout did reasonably well this week.
Right. Are there any of those global catalysts that the market was also taking in, the likes of the stimulus package in the US and the rollout of vaccines across the world?
Well, the rollout of vaccines obviously have a very major impact on markets because as we see that happening, we have a bit of a risk-on scenario that helps the emerging markets quite a lot. But that's generally because if the vaccine programs run fairly well throughout the world, it's expected that the pandemic will be controlled and that will bring back some well-needed economic growth throughout the world. The stimulus package out of the US and anywhere else in the world, any stimulus packages is being regarded as very, very advantageous to the market, assisting so needed economic growth throughout the world. So yeah, as those two things come up and work well, we will continuously see that markets are doing better. That would also help, of course, with consumers coming back on to spending money in the markets. Companies would do better, results would be better. And in South Africa, especially, if you look at the results posted and the news that came out regarding some of our mining houses and the rise in their profits, then it's no wonder that your stock markets have done well, especially on the commodity side. But generally, that will be true for all companies who will be doing better as we get back to economic growth.
What has been doing better as well, Andre, is the rand. It's actually managed to remain under 15 against the US dollar for a few days now. And I'm just wondering, will it be short-lived? Will it hold on until perhaps we get to the budget speech in a few days?
I don't think we should hang too much onto the budget speech as a major catalyst. Yes, it will definitely have an impact, and we're all looking forward to hear what Mr. Mboweni is saying. But I think generally everybody expects that to be reasonably bad news. But at least we'll get an update on what happens, and we'll see most probably what he says. How will the spending be curbed and brought under control? But to ride too much just on the budget speech, I would not do that. But I go back to the results posted and the updates on profits by some of the mining sector. And you look at those figures, and then that tells you, and coming out of an excellent citrus season, for instance, a record citrus season on the agricultural side there. But, link that up with the massive figures increase in sales by the mining houses. That creates a heck of a lot of inflow of currency into the market. And then together with that, in the last week or three, we have seen an inflow into our bond market as well. That's linked to, once again, stimulus packages, economic growth. So there's a lot of dollars that comes into the country at this point in time. That really is one of the reasons why we're seeing the rand at these levels where it is. And I think it could be sustained for a little while longer, especially with the dollar that's fairly stable at these levels, but still with a little bit of a bias towards a weakening of the US dollar.
Yeah. Andre, let's move on to some company news. Cilliers, obviously being hit by the tough economic climate. But what was more interesting in their situation is the fact that governments are lagging in the migration to digital television and remaining in analog is having a severe impact on the profits that the company could be making.
Absolutely. But, you know, I don't want to criticize the government, but the government's been lacking on a lot of things in the last 2 or 3 years in moving forward and making decisions. And that's been hitting a lot of companies hard. And now Cilliers is just becoming one of those casualties on their manufacturing side. And yes, we are seeing that they're going to file for liquidation. You know, and if the government doesn't start moving and making decisions quickly and faster, there's a lot more companies that will be suffering going into the future. Because, you know, we need the government to make decisions. We've all spoken about this demand or this need for the government to make structural changes. One of the structural changes is the faster acting of government. I've listened to Mr. Ramaphosa last night, you know, saying how easy it is to open a business, mentioning that 125,000 businesses was registered. You know, by looking at the registration of a business doesn't mean that that business is operational and able to operate in markets. There's a lot of other factors that needs to, I mean, simply completing a little bit of a registration form, submitting it to CIPRO is not running a business. It's not making the business operational. For that, you need a lot of facilitation by government to act faster and assist companies in their operational sides.
Very, very interesting there, the policy uncertainty and the pace of structural reform having a severe impact on one of the big manufacturers. But a final thought from you, Andre, more changes, talking of change rather, we're seeing more and more retailers creating loyalty programs for their customers. And I'm just wondering, how does this help them?
Well, it helps them in the sense that, you know, if you have that loyalty program, and we've seen that from the banks, we've seen that from a lot of other companies. And when you speak to people, you know, when they swipe their card, they say, let me swipe this card because I'm earning points or I'm earning money or whatever the case might be. And the retailers are just coming back on. We've had that from Woolworths and all these other companies as well before, and now we're seeing it from Wimpy. That's simply coming back down to retaining your customers. And I would not ascribe it so much to a COVID situation. That's simply a program so that your customer comes back and that there's an incentivization for the customer to come back to the same store, to the same shop, to the same restaurant, so that they have repeat business from that. So something that we've seen being used in the past by many companies, banks. I mean, there's literally almost nobody that doesn't have a loyalty program anymore. And those that didn't have it is actually lagging the market a little bit. So I'm not surprised to see that that's happening, especially after the COVID situation. You need that retention of customers.
I must say, Andre, as a consumer myself, I've benefited quite substantially from various loyalty programs, but we'll leave it there for this evening. That's Andre Cilliers from TreasuryOne.